Welcome back to part 2, Common jQuery Functions. In this part we'll revisit the CSS function in detail. We'll also look at add class and remove class, which allow you to manipulate the stylistic elements by adding and removing classes. We'll also look at text and HTML functions that allow you access to and an ability to set the inner HTML and inner text of a particular DOM element. We'll also look at the attribute function that allows you to get and set attribute values, as well as the val function that allows you to get and set values in form data. When we first looked at the CSS function, we provided two arguments, strings, to set a property of a given CSS property. When you provide one argument, you're actually retrieving the value of a CSS property. If the selector has multiple elements, it returns the value of the first element that it encounters. Let's take a look. Here we have the same page as before. The intro paragraph can be selected using its ID. We'll go ahead and provide one argument to the CSS function here to retrieve its color and store it into the variable C. It's red corresponding to RGB value of 255, 0, and 0. This works for any CSS property. We can retrieve the font family, for example, which is Times New Roman. Once we have these values stored in variables, we can use them to set the CSS properties of other elements. For example, we'll select all elements that have a foo class and set their color to the same color as the intro paragraph. That'll change the first and the last element in the main list. Their color is now red. Recall that style rules can also be defined using an elements class. You can use the add class and remove class functions to add or remove a class from an element. At the same time, you can add and remove multiple classes if you delimit them by a space. Alternatively, you can use toggle class, which will add the class if it's not already there, and remove it if it already is there. Here we've modified the style file so that all classes with foo will appear as green. The first and the last element in the list are of class foo, and they appear as green. Let's go ahead and remove the class. Removing them should remove that CSS rule. And now they appear black. We can add them back to all list elements, making them all appear in green. We can toggle them as well. The text function allows you to get and set the inner text of any HTML element. For example, the paragraph element, greetings, Husker fans, ! has inner text, greetings, Husker fans, including the punctuation. If you apply this function to multiple items, the inner text of each is concatenated all together into one string. If you provide no argument to the function, then you're getting the text that can be stored into a variable. If you provide one argument, then you're setting the inner text. Note that the old text is removed and lost unless you saved it off into a variable. Here we have our pages before. Let's get the text of the intro paragraph. This is an example program that implements elements. Note it preserves leading and trailing white space. Now let's reset the text by providing new text. The content has changed. To illustrate with multiple elements, let's select all list items and apply the text function to them. There are 9 list elements: home, about us, contact, introduction, etc., etc., etc. The content of all of them has been concatenated together in one large string. We can do something similar by setting the text. However, this is dangerous as it would set the text of all list items to foo. Similarly, the HTML function allows you to get or set the full inner HTML of an element. HTML tags of descendants are all preserved. It doesn't just get the inner text. Similar in usage, you can get or set using 0 or 1 arguments. As an example, I'm selecting the main list here and calling the HTML function. This will preserve all the inner tags of all of the child descendants, all 6 list items. It concatenates them all together, preserving those HTML tags. As before, you can also set the inner HTML by providing a string containing valid HTML. As before, it will remove all the original content and it will be lost. The attribute function allows you to get and set attribute values of an element. Again, to get, you provide one argument, the attribute name. To set, you provide two arguments, the name and the value. Here I've got a selector to select all anchor tags, the links, and I'm getting all the href attributes. In contrast to the text and HTML functions, only the first value will be returned. In this case, it found the first link, which was home. The href here is just a hash, which is just a reference to the page itself. We also have a link here to the bulletin. Its ID is course link. When we select it and get its attribute, it gives us the full URL that it's actually pointing to. By providing two arguments, you can actually change what it links to. Now when I click on the link, it takes me to the CSCE page instead of the bulletin. Elements entered or selected from values from form elements are not part of the HTML. The val function allows you to conveniently get and set values of form elements. Here we have a single input text box. Right now it's empty. If we get the value, we simply get an empty string. If we come back over and type a name, Chris, and evaluate this again, we get the string that's been typed into the input box. By providing one argument, we can actually reset what it is. And now it's reset over here. jQuery provides a special function called ready. In some instances, we may want code to execute only after a page is loaded. For example, if we want to initialize an interface element or maybe get some data so that we can load it into a table. However, we'll want to wait to ensure that the page is entirely loaded. This is especially important if our code relies on some other script files. For example, if our code relies on code loaded from another external script file, we would want to ensure that that script file is completely downloaded and loaded into memory before we execute that code. To do this, we can place our code into the ready function, which will only be executed after the page is downloaded, and ready. To do that, the following syntax is used. We'll focus more in detail on this later on.